Thanks a lot. Greetings to everyone from outside, regrettably, the European Union, based as I am in Edinburgh. Um, can I get the slides? Is someone starting the slides? Excellent. Yeah. It is my great pleasure to sort of start the discussion about the proposal that we are putting here on the table. Um, we've already heard, and if you can move to the next slide, our timeline, please, for me. Yeah, we've already heard that there's a background history starting in 2018 or thereabouts. Um, Two things to mention from my perspective here at that time. Obviously, the shell-shocked situation here in the UK was still very strong in our minds. Brexit very much dominating the political discussion, but also this is pre-COVID, and that is maybe important to remember because these are things that have shaped and changed since then the discussion. Um, as Luciano mentioned, I think it was very important to develop these principles at the time, but they are very much a child of the 2018s, a time when stories about the abuse of AI hit the press, where concerns about the use of AI, in particular in things like the justice system, Compass, but also recommender systems, automated content filtering hit the news. So it was really important to step back at that point and develop a map that would allow us to connect to all these emerging debates, discussions. And the five principles that came out of this are relatively abstract, but they fulfilled that role, structuring the debate, creating a shared vocabulary. The next proposal, 2019, the second outcome, by contrast, then looked at the ways in which these ideas could be turned into practice from the perspective of regulation. What sort of regulatory framework would be necessary and best suited to turn these abstract ideas into practice? And the model that we developed here very much emphasized that we need a different type of interaction between the regulator and the regulated, between the scientists and the humanities, between the lawyers and the programmers, a middle out model of co-regulation that has space for top-down regulations like the AI Act, that has space for self-regulation in those industries that are the least risky, but focuses in particular on this new mode of interaction. And that for me was always the most important thing working with AI for people. I'm a little bit, I think, the elder statesman here. I'm the only one who was already contributing to the first paper and is still alive and around in the last version. Um, but one of the things that I found very positive, very important, was the way in which we interacted with industry, remaining our independence, very strongly emphasizing our independence, but being open for the inputs and the ideas. And I think that resulted in particular now with our latest proposal, where Bianca and Fujitsu played such an important role, herding us academics and steering us in the right direction and organizing our collaboration. A particularly good way of turning this notion of increased collaboration between academia, regulatory bodies, and industry into practice. So for me, really important. And in a way, going back also to some of the things that were already said by the other speakers in the first session, to have trustworthy AI requires independent voices. Many of these independent voices will come from academia. So it's in particular important to preserve the social capital that we have from a visibly independent academic community, one that doesn't shy away from interacting with industry. There's the opposite danger sometimes to be holier than holy and treating any collaboration already as tainting, but also remaining very visibly independent from it. And that is for the benefit of industry ultimately itself, because only then can public trust be created. And I think that is also an important call for Europe. To preserve this type of independent knowledge, to ensure that the funding is there, that doesn't make us too dependent on industry, and on the same time facilitate this type of exchange that we had. The 7 global frameworks that followed this report took these ideas to the individual sectors. And here my Brexit comment comes in. I think we face two different types of philosophies worldwide. The Anglo-American model that says we wait until there are problems in individual domains, we respond to these individual problems, and then abstract principles will emerge from this. By contrast, the European approach, having cross-sector rules and then work downwards to the individual industries. I think with AI for People, we managed to strike a right balance and get the best of both approaches. The third 2020 model, looking at specific industries, legal industry in my case, with Ronan, who will talk after me, make an important contribution, showed how you can integrate sector-specific approaches with these overarching general principles. And from that, very, very quickly now to the topic that will dominate the rest of the proceedings, our ethics by design approach. Starting really with the GDPR, design-centric approaches to regulation, focusing at the point of developing models, developing software, rather than coming only later as a police or the judge who, after something went wrong, gets involved. Really crucial, this new model of regulatory governance that starts really, really early on, poses huge challenges to industry. And here we find a proposal by us, which we hope you will find convincing, that tries to translate these into very concrete design rules, procedures that are useful for industries. And I finish with that. I started saying that I'm here the elder statesman. And the other thing that struck me working with AI for People is the changing of the guards. The young people that contributed to this report, you already heard Virginia. I also want to mention Christina Volyanova, who made a major contribution, can't speak here today. These people already grew up with interdisciplinary expertise, of which my generation could only have dreamt. They bridge the gaps between the disciplines, and with that, I think, can make a particularly valuable contribution to this new way of constraining, regulating AI and turning it for the public good. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Burkhard. I will take over now. And if I could have the next slide, please. So my name is Ronan Kennedy, has been mentioned already. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of the context to the development of this report. You possibly already picked up, and you will see as the individual presenters begin to speak as well. And certainly you'll see it in the report itself. We're a diverse group. We're quite a mix of different disciplines: ethics, technology, law. We're also a mix of backgrounds and contexts, so some from academia, some from business, some from consulting. And that has been a great strength, I think. Our initial approaches to the topic were perhaps a little bit academic, but we came to realize relatively quickly that in order for this document to be useful, it needed to be practical. And in many ways, that journey mirrors the timeline that Burkhard has just presented there, in which AI for People has moved from abstract principles down to very practical things, more and more practical over time. But also one of the themes that was present in the first part of this afternoon's event, which is how European Union law and policy has also become much more real and practical over time now, particularly with the AI Act moving into its actual implementation stage. So what we're trying to do within this report is to give people guidance on how they can embed ethical issues and compliance with the law from the outset in the development of an AI system. We've taken into account the various ethical guidelines, recommendations that exist at European level and internationally. This isn't AI for People's unique set of values, but bringing together all of the work that's already been there. As the slide says, providing an actionable blueprint so that then this can be executed and improved over time in an iterative fashion. If I could have the next slide, please. So what are we trying to do? Well, it's been said before, we're trying to give practical guidance. If an organization seeks to comply with European Union law with law internationally. Also, this is there is the emergence of AI-focused law within the US has been mentioned, and coming out of the Council of Europe as well. If compliance is something that is important, and it should be important to all businesses, then this is the guidebook. If compliance is a journey rather than a destination, then this is also the roadmap, perhaps to a journey that's never going to completely complete, but nonetheless, this will make that journey a much more satisfying and rewarding process. So what we aim to do is to provide a step-by-step guide so that as developers are working through all the different steps of designing, developing, and very importantly, maintaining AI systems, because it's not simply a matter of putting the system in place and then walking away and forgetting about it. At each step in that process, you need to be thinking about ethics. So we've provided a very practical guidance on how to do this. We've aimed to make the report short and digestible. Obviously, this is a complex area, which requires, as Burkhard has mentioned, integrating a variety of different disciplines. We can't compress everything into the space of one single document, so we have provided pointers and references to existing best practice methodologies and tools that have been developed elsewhere. And we also don't think that this is going to be the final word on ethics by design or on any of these issues. So we have then provided recommendations to European Union institutions, to policymakers, on how they can further develop and support these ideas. If I could have the next slide, please. So we're not in this reinventing the wheel, we're building on and integrating existing expertise and knowledge. We're taking what is already there and presenting it in a new format. This is not intended to be a rigid requirement. The emphasis in the document is always on flexibility. The first major step is actually to assess the individual local context. And this is intended to be an iterative approach, a dynamic approach. The document itself, I think, and this approach of ethics by design should have a life beyond this document and will improve over time, but also an individual organization's engagement with this and its application of it is something that can itself be improved through that iteration, taking on board feedback as time goes by. I will now pass to Bianca, who will expand on this in more detail.
Thank you, Ronan, and thank you all on this very innovative topic we're all thrilled to mention. Another thing I'd like to add before passing on to the next slide is, as rapporteur for this white paper, I'd like to thank everyone of the working group, of which you'll be seeing just a few of us sending out, but there has been lots more contribution behind this work as well. Going on to the next slide, just to give you a high-level overview of how the process of ethics by design has been developed by our working group and scientific committee. As you can see, there are 4 main phases that are preceded by a getting started. So we recommend that both public and private organizations, rather big or small, before adopting and defining what their ethics by design process can look like, should start thinking about understanding their organizational context, understanding what could their AI governance model be, what are the applicable laws and regulations and best practices, and what type of expertise and skills they need before launching into an ethics by design approach. So in the getting started, you'll find what are the key minimum, let's say, requirements and suggestions that organizations should delve into to best prepare and structure this process. The process itself, as you can see, is divided into 5 phases. The first one is understanding the specifics of the single AI system that will be object of the ethics by design approach. Within this activity, the idea is to, from a high-level perspective, as we know that many times once we have an idea of a possible use case, not all specifications and details such as architectures, models, data, where is it coming from, where is it going from, what is the geographical location from a physical or technological perspective is always available. So what we have listed and described within this phase is what are the minimum and key required data needed to go on to a next step and next phase, which is conducting a preliminary impact assessment. Now, within phase one, within the scoping and specifications, what organizations will need is a collaboration from a various set of stakeholders, including who is the business owner, the business ideator of that AI use case, along with the more technical and legal experts as well. In phase two, with the intent of not blocking the progressive and innovative approach of all the different organizations within this AI race, we defined a high-level preliminary impact assessment, which should help organizations already identify if we're talking about a high-risk use case, if it's prohibited against some types of laws and regulations or industry guidelines. What are the major attention points that if the project were to be approved from a business and technical feasibility perspective, need to be then mitigated and addressed, therefore, in phase three. So between phase two and phase three, we have the approval, let's say, of what is the actual project and ideation of the use case. And in phase three, based on the list of impacts that are to be assessed, of course, following what are the ethical principles, and also as our following colleagues will describe in our guidances and checklists, we will then develop and recommend the trustworthy AI system design. Within this phase, the objective is to list what are the specific design requirements that the AI use case should embed. Within these types of requirements, what is most relevant is that these requirements not only be technological, but also organizational and procedural as well, meaning that there needs to be a correct training and awareness of the developers, users, providers that will be designing the use case, but also technological measures and procedurals and processes to review and monitor control that the use case itself is being developed in an ethical way. Within phase four, based on the design of these requirements, we have the pure implementation. Within the implementation, of course, based on the measure and controls that have been defined, there are going to be different implementation guidances that are provided within the report itself. And upon finalizing the implementation and then therefore the go live, we have the monitoring of the compliance of these as well. So going on to the next slide, these phases that we have constructed from an ethics by design approach fall into what could be called a standard system development lifecycle phases. So as you can see throughout the phase one of ideation, so understanding, what is the idea of the business idea behind it, we would also suggest that we start thinking about what are the specific scope specifications in order to conduct the preliminary impact assessment. Once there is the approval of the specific AI system from a business, legal, ethical, feasibility perspective, then as you can see, the phases 3, 4, and 5 later on after the go live will follow the design, build, test, and deploy. So as you can see, we have also performed a mapping of these specific phases also within the standard SDLC life cycles, so as to best incorporate and embed what are existing processes within your organization. Having said that, I'll wrap it up and pass the word to Sergey, which will deep dive better on some of these aspects.
Thank you very much, Bianca. And I also have to say that it was a great collaboration. It's really illuminating working together with different representative industry and science. So let's dive a little bit deeper if you go to the next slide. Okay, as we have said, the approach is really practical and we want to provide you and hands-on such that any organization at different maturity level is able to follow it through and implement ethics by design if they really decide to do it. Therefore, as you have seen, the approach is phased on the one hand side, guiding the reader from the ideation, the very first phase of organizational getting started, up to the deployment of the system and supervision. And here we see a kind of zoomed in view on the very first getting started phase. As you have seen, the main document describes, in principle, the main activities you need to undertake if you want to implement ethics by design. Here, in the example of getting started phase, which is about understanding the ecosystem of your organization in the external view, but also understanding your internal structure, the main activities would be around developing an AI governance model in order to understand how you develop and which process are you developing AI, how you take into account whether AI, a particular project should be implemented or not, how you deal with risks, and what is the accountability of different internal people if something goes wrong. Of course, you need a regulatory inventory, since not only the EU AI Act might be applicable, but also sectorial regulations, which are very specific for your particular company or the sector you're operating in. And then we are speaking about identifying stakeholders, where you have internal stakeholders with different development teams, regulational team, different managerial levels you might have, but also external stakeholders, regulators, and of course the final customers who are being, and also their relations in society which are impacted by the AI system. The ethical principles, having identified it, based on the stakeholders and the understanding of the stakeholders, you can start to develop an understanding also of their particular fears, of the stakes they have in the game, and their ethical values. And of course, you need to create an ethical principles inventory, but we have heard you don't need to start from scratch. There are, of course, the ethical principles are based on the underlying principles of the European Union, which are being embodied now in the EU AI Act, but also on some particular principles of your organization, of your domain, and the particular emphasis of principles from the stakeholders which you have elicited. And finally, you need to translate the ethical principles into operational requirements. So you need to understand how to make it actionable. So having specified the main activities, what is very interesting is that we also provide the expected results in the end of this phase. So in the end of the getting started phase, we expect you to have a governance model. You need to have a commitment of the top company executives that you really want to implement ethics in your organization, that it's really a company priority to make it this way in order for it to live and to breathe. Then you have the regulatory inventory, you have the list of stakeholders, you have a particular list of ethical principles, and also the trustworthy AI system requirements. By doing it in this way, it's very easy to adapt this approach to the existing, let's say, structure which you already have in your organization, and we will see it shortly how it can be done in this way. Finally, while we describe it in a high level, it can be that for some organizations might start from scratch in this work, especially if you may be a smaller company just embedding and starting with this journey. And there will be provide a list of practical guides which take you by the hand and help you understand how it can be done. For example, you have the guide on which are the main applicable AI regulations. How do you identify the stakeholders? How to compile this inventory, and how you translate actually the requirements into, how you translate the principles into system requirements. And if you go on the next slide, you can see very shortly how it can be done in an example. So in this scenario, a financial institution, and you are developing an AI system for loan screening. And you are on your way with ethics by design, but you are not starting from scratch. You have already developed an AI governance model and also regulatory inventory in your company, because as a financial institution, usually this the risk management and many compliance has been put into place. However, just by checking the getting started, the expected results of the getting started phase, you might see that you are missing some of the results. For example, the list of stakeholders, the list of ethical principles, and the trustworthy AI system requirements. Having identified these gaps, you can then look at the activities which have to be done and understand whether you can work on them based on your internal know-how and you already understand how to do it. Or if you need some help, you can go and look at the practical guidelines, like provided on the right-hand side, follow them through and read, look also on the mentioned literature, other guidelines and best practices to make it happen. Having said that, I think we can move on to the next slide.
Many thanks, Sergey. So it has already been explained that our aim when working on the report was to make the report as practical as possible. And in addition to outlining activities and expected outcomes for each phase of the ethics by design process, we also published 12 practical guides as part of the report. So each practical guide is linked to a specific main activity in the ethics by design process and aims to support organizations in carrying out such tasks. In the practical guides, you will not only find instructions on how to perform the activity, but also examples based on hypothetical scenarios to illustrate the tasks, as well as templates for the final outputs and useful existing resources. So let's continue with the hypothetical scenario of a financial institution wanting to perform the mapping of the relevant stakeholders for a particular use case. The practical guide for that task recommends one method to comprehensively identify stakeholders, and also offers a set of categories for stakeholders that can be used to guide the identification task. In addition to that, you will find references to relevant standards, such as technical standards providing a definition of stakeholders, or standards defining concepts and terminologies used in AI system development. And finally, you will also find templates and examples of the expected outcomes. So for instance, if you look at this slide, on the right here, we have a template table that can be used to ensure that all relevant information is collected for each stakeholder. And the table in this case is pre-populated using an hypothetical use case. And this will just help the reader to understand better how to use the table and what the final output will be. Below the text, we have another extract from the report, which is a stakeholder interaction diagram that can help to better visualize and understand how the stakeholders interact with the AI system, and to, of course, to uncover potential ethical issues. And also in this case, the stakeholder interaction diagram was created using a hypothetical use case to guide the reader. So if we move to the next slide, we will find two other examples of resources available for very key activities, which aim at assessing the ethical impact of the AI system. So the screenshot on the left is taken from a practical guide, supports the reader in examining the ethical impact of an AI system, and shows examples of guiding questions that can be used to initially explore ethical issues. Of course, we are aware that there are different ethical impact assessment approaches already proposed in the literature. And for this reason, we have decided also to include a list of them in the practical guide to signpost useful resources that are consistent with the ethics by design process and that can be used by organizations when performing such tasks. So on this slide on the right, you can find an extract of the table listing some of the external resources. And of course, the table continues in the report. If we go to the next slide, if we move, yes, perfect, thank you. We will also use a screenshot to better show the level of details that are available in the report. So here we have a screenshot from an appendix, which we know is very unusual when we are presenting a report like this one, but we really wanted to put you in the reader's shoe. So here, what we have is a final checklist that allows the reader to review the implementation of each activity, where in the report they can find the information and also the external resources available. We spent a considerable amount of time to build this checklist because we wanted to provide a very comprehensive list of external resources. And here we'll find the standards that are relevant for each step of the process, as well as practical references and guides for sandboxes of new AI use cases. So the aim is to provide enough details to ensure that regulatory and ethical requirements are integrated into the full AI system lifecycle. We also had another aim when producing this content, which is to allow comparison and integration with existing processes, criteria, and technical standards. And one example, for instance, is the data protection impact assessment that might be integrated also with some of these activities. So as mentioned in the first part of the event, the report offers an actionable blueprint, which we hope can be implemented thanks to the practical insights included in the different guides. We are aware that more can be done with organizations, so we really hope to see this report be discussed in the future and be improved further. So I will now pass over to Patrice for the final recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Virginia. Maybe next slide. I will run you through the recommendations of the report. So it's a mix of classic and new points. First thing is evangelizing the ethics by design approach to EU institutions. One point is raising awareness and supporting education through information spreading, guidance, training, etc. Another thing is expanding the community of stakeholders and through dedicated platforms, networks, events, so that we generate a real dialogue for co-designing, for co-creation, for cooperation. And at this point, I would like to mention something which is important and sometimes forgotten, the need probably to fund those groups that are less, that are sort of left behind in those kinds of co-creation. They need to be brought to the table if we want to help AI for all. The second aspect is monitoring and building trust. Of course, you need to control the implementation and evaluate the implementation through a set of key performance indicators. You also need to reward excellence, because psychology works even in the AI realm. So you need to use trusted certification and to generate an appetite for trusted certification that is based on standards. Another aspect is incentivizing. You need to identify and expose the best practices through benchmarking, so that stakeholders have at their disposal an inventory of use cases that will allow them to build upon and translate ethics principle into true trustworthy operational AI systems. So the next point is very important too. You need to secure coherence and consistency throughout, and this is a point that leads me to the very final consideration I would like to make. As the EU AI Act and ethics by design approach gather steam, they will certainly run into some stretch of the need for coherence and consistency. And that's where I think it was important to bring the Council of Europe to the table. As you could hear from Mr. Bartholin earlier, of course, you cannot bring ethics to court. It will not be actionable in court, but ethics, the ethical approach certainly can nurture behavior and lawmaking all along. And the Council of Europe will probably be able to bring a more global achievement of the AI Act and the ethics by design approach, and a more robust as well. More global simply because it goes beyond the EU geography, and more robust because the 27 member parties of the Council of Europe that are also member states of the EU will have will combine more closely the two perspectives: the perspective from Brussels, which is certainly business oriented and to ensure the business competitiveness of the competitiveness of EU business on addressing AI, all the AI novelties, whether as producers or users of it. and the perspective of Strasbourg, which is more about compliance all the time with the human dignity and other principles you have heard. So last point is that this was certainly a milestone conference, but this is only the beginning, and you could all realize that we have our work cut out for us. Thank you very much.
So I think I can say that I'm very impressed by the strict timekeeping of the panel, as well as by the content. And I would like to say that those of you who are inscribed here, you will be able to, if you're not already, plug yourselves into the ongoing conversation for AI4People and to obtain copies of the report and to participate in other ways in the work that we have been outlining this afternoon. So before we finish just on time, I would like to, as I say, thank on behalf of all the audience, the presenters of this interesting report. So with thanks to our technical team as well, who've enabled us to do this work, I would like to thank all the speakers from the two sessions, but most especially the audience, because you're what makes it happen. And please stay in touch with AI4People, the Institute, the advisory team as we go forward, because with pride and modesty, the AI Act has now to be put into operation. Thank you very much and have a good evening.